The Vision Hunt decree was in full effect, and after a more recent clash between the Shogun's army and the rebels, everything went further down into a dark abyss. Lucky for you, you were far detached from that. The law, the decree, it didn't fully affect you. Your father was a pirate, and captain of the Shroud Breaker, a ship specifically designed to break the shroud of thunder and lightning that protected Inazuma. Under your father's command, you lived a life on the seas, traveling from mainland Teyvat to Inazuma. In fact, it was your father who kept the rebels' dream of resistance alive by supplying them under the Shogun's nose. You, with the rest of the Shroudbreaker's crew, had recently finished a supply run. However, just when you were about to set sails again, your father spotted the figure of a striking young woman amongst the rebels. Which, judging by his facial expression, only meant one thing. This was going to be a longer stay. Your father introduced her as Captain Bidu, an old acquaintance, and you had already stopped listening. Shrugging, you decided to mingle. The war itself was quite uninteresting to you, as so far you had never really spent much time in Inazuma at once. You looked back at your dad. He and the captain were walking together into a tavern, and you rolled your eyes. The last time your dad left for a tavern with a woman you had never met, you and your crew were stuck in Liyue for 2 weeks. Sighing, you continued to aimlessly wander the beautiful island of Watatsumi. Thankfully, rodent activity had been low, and hilly trolls almost but entirely exterminated. So you weren't scared. By the time the sun had begun to set, you had found yourself a peaceful little place atop a cliff overlooking the entire valley. It was so peaceful. You couldn't help but yawn and lie down on the ground. Closing your eyes, you let the salty ocean air brush over you. Inhale. Exhale. Your life was turbulent, and on the seas you could rarely catch a tranquil moment like this. You didn't have the heart to tell your father yet, but you desired this. A life away from the thievery of the seas. That's why you had convinced him to take this opportunity for some smuggling. Despite the danger in it being illegal, it was far more convenient and less life-threatening than hoping to catch a merchant ship. You smiled. Of course, you could never have this life you desired. While being spared the burden of having taken a life, there still were so many sins you have committed. Thinking about it, you began to tear up. Whenever you reached this point of melancholic meditation, you just did that. Unable to turn it off, and being glad no one was here. Well, except there was. A stranger that you haven't noticed yet watched you from the crown of a tree. He had been here before you. If anything, you were intruding on him. The man had preferred to remain silent simply out of courtesy and respect of the silent nature around the two of you. But when you began sobbing, he tilted his head and jumped off the sturdy branch to the ground with a quiet thud. Immediately, you yourself jumped on your feet, expecting a Ronin or a hilly churl attack. But instead, through the fleeting sunlight, you could see a kind face. Maple-colored eyes, white hair, and a sheathed sword. At least, those were the first things you took note of. You looked worried. "Excuse me," he said, and bowed for a respectful greeting. a motion you copied before defensively asking, "Who are you?" He nodded slowly. "Kaede Kazuha, at your service." You told him your name, still in your defensive position. "My apologies," he said, "but you intruded on my solitude." "I don't intend to interrupt your thoughts, but when I noticed your distress, I had to make sure you're all right." Slowly your posture relaxed. I'm fine," you stuttered. He stared out into the direction of the setting sun, while you sat back down. After a minute of silence, he once again spoke up. "May I sit with you then?" Shrugging, you just muttered a quick, "Knock yourself out." He sat a few feet away. Slowly you breathed in and out. This wasn't so bad. Kazuha seemed like a person made from the same wood as you. You both could enjoy the smaller things, and knew when to keep your mouth shut. At least until the oppressive silence seemed to become too much for the both of you. He was the first to break the silence. "I saw you with the pirates." You turned to face him. "And?" He smiled. "Kokomi appears to understand that sometimes you have to ask the shady type to achieve victory." You blushed, feeling emotions bubble up. "But," he interjected, before your emotions could turn to rage, "I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I have great respect for your kind. At least, as long as you follow your code." You smiled. "My father is a stickler for the rules, which, considering the trade he follows, is ironic in a way." You paused. "But rules are needed, especially on a ship." "You aren't as loud as your crew." Shrugging, you replied, "I mean, I can be loud." Kazuha huffed, but didn't reply. "And what do you do here?" He looked back at you, and you could feel your cheeks begin to heat up. Kazuha was just so handsome. "The Shogun is responsible for the unraveling of my life, uprooting me like an unwanted weed. I'm glad I got out with my life." Silence befell the man again. You really shouldn't prod. And by now the sun had vanished behind the horizon. The air quickly cooled down. Luckily, though, the handful of clouds that had covered the full moon were dissipating, giving the world around you a pale twilight that had something mystifying about it. Captain Bidu took me in at my darkest hour. You blinked. That was the woman you had You blinked. That was the woman your dad had lived with. You shuddered at the thought of your father most likely fornicating with her at this point in time. If you're just sailors, if you're just a sailor at this point, I mean, then what are you doing here? Kazuha chuckled. Well, we are mercenaries, hired by Zangonomiya Kokomi to be reinforcements when needed. He smiled gently and you grinned. So, you said almost mockingly, while you guys are the shady fighters, we are the shady merchants. He laughed out loud. It was pleasant and warmed your heart. This boy gave you the feeling that he hasn't laughed in a while. That is an interesting way of putting it. The two of you fell silent again. And in a way you were glad. But after a minute of peace, you caught him looking at you again. And what is your story? He asked calmly. You blinked and decided to give him a short version. I was born on our ship, the Shroudbreaker. Committed my first crime at the age of 7 by pretending I'm an orphan and scamming mora from people. I upgraded to pickpocketing at age 10. Of course, that was only when we were in port. My mother died when I was 12. She fell off the ship while drunk. We never found her. My dad has been really protective, calling me his most important treasure, that he is so unwilling to lose that he rarely leaves a port without me. Kazuha huffed impressed. And what do you want? You smirked. I throw that question right back at you, buddy. He laughed again. It would ruin the mood. It would, really. You blinked. Huh. If you say so. Tell me. What do you want? He repeated in a softer voice. You sighed in defeat. I want to live in a tiny cottage. A Mondstadt style. Or maybe in a Zoomen. Not fully sure yet. I want a big garden. And you looked away and blushed. I want someone to come back to me. Kazuha did not expect that, and voiced his disbelief. I told you, you muttered. I was born on the sea. Every day was just things happening. And I want things to stop happening. Kazuha blinked. Huh. Spoken like the Shogun. Not like that, you quickly defended yourself. I mean, slow down. I want to sleep in real beds more often. I want... You went quiet instantly. Do you want me to prod? He asked after a minute of you quietly fidgeting. I do. He huffed amused. Huh. Go on then. Tell me. I want a husband and a child. And I want to spare this child the life I was born in. Sometimes absolute freedom just becomes too free. I want something to chain me down. I want to stay in a place. I want revenge, said Kazuha after you had once again gone silent. The Shogun murdered a dear friend of mine. He opposed the Vision Hunter decree, and paid for that with his life. I left Inazuma shortly after to avoid sharing his fate. You looked into Kazuha's eyes as they began to fill with tears. And I returned, filled with so much anger that I tried to suppress, and Quickly you huddled over to him, wrapping your arms around his shoulder, hugging him deeply. He exhaled, accepting your quiet touches. If you win and achieve this dream of revenge, he whispered, I would love to help you get yours fulfilled. You blinked. But we just barely know each other. You retreated from him. Kazuha was now so close to you. Your face is mere inches away. I mean, you have to start somewhere. Blinking, you said, I can't just leave my father and the crew behind. Won't your dream be different then? He replied. Your body began to feel hot. You huffed. You? He asked. Can I give you a question? Sure. Your lips quivered. Can I kiss you, Kazuha? You may. Simultaneously, the two of you closed the distance, almost hitting each other's noses. Your lips touched. Your first kiss. His lips were so soft, so feminine. Yet the arms that now wrapped around you demonstrated his raw strength. Gently he began to push into you, as the emotions and hormones inside the both of your bodies began to shed inhibitions. The thought alone of his touch, filling you with so much pleasure, it was difficult not to moan. Something you did do, after his tongue gently penetrated your lips, softly gliding over your own. Your eyes rolled back as your body got weaker. Your heart pounded as lewd kissing noises reached your ears. A squeak escaped you when you felt one of his hands curiously squeeze one of your breasts. You smiled internally and pushed against him as a sign of silent permission, a permission he also lovingly accepted. His hands wandered down to your butt, rubbing soft circles into your cheeks. You groaned as his rubs became more desperate and needy. Your body became so unbearably hot you wanted to scream. Your legs quivered with pleasure and excitement. Then Kazuha pushed his body against yours, throwing you on your back. He separated his lips from yours. As you heaved, your tongue stuck out of your mouth, strings of salvia covering your lips, and your eyes had rolled back. This dumb, yet completely lewd expression threw Kazuha over the edge. He opened your leather tunic to reveal your naked body to him, while you yourself began fiddling with his belt. And once you revealed his manhood, you fully allowed yourself to be taken by him. You awoke when the first rays of sunshine hit your face. Your back hurt from having slept on the hard ground. After having rubbed your face, you looked around. Kazuha was already awake. Still unclothed, he sat a few meters away from you, watching the sunrise. He had blanketed you with his kimono. You huffed quietly. Your legs felt like jelly, but you somehow managed to stand. You quickly grabbed your pants and dressed as the boy turned his attention to you. There was a hint of disappointment in his face. "Good morning," he said with a soft smile. "What's with the hurry?" he asked. You were already out of breath. I need to check up if my father is doing okay." Kazuha smiled and approached you, his naked body distracting you from putting your clothes back on. He placed one hand behind your neck, while the other moved down to your hips. "I'm sure he's fine. There's no danger here. Come. Stay with me a bit longer." You looked away, but then sat down, sighing in defeat. You didn't know it yet, But while you were enjoying the afterglow of last night with the roguishly handsome boy, your father had a very fulfilling night with Captain Bidou himself. As he watched her snoring form next to him, all your father could think of was how much he had missed this woman. Licking his lips, he let the events of the last night pass him by, before quietly saying, "Fine, Captain. I'll let my daughter decide if she wants to stay here with the rebels, or come back with me on the Shroudbreaker." A cheeky grin appeared on his face. "But first," he crawled back under the blankets, "I need to check up on this precious booty one last time."